The expedition ship Wanderer's Hope had crashed 3 cycles ago, scattering its crew across the hostile surface of Krell 9. Arya was the only human survivor who'd made it to the northern wastes, where the wind howled like a wounded beast and the twin suns barely broke through the perpetual storm clouds. She should have been dead a dozen times over. The planet's atmosphere was breathable, but everything else wanted her gone. The flora secreted acids, the geology shifted without warning. And the fauna was where things got truly interesting. The Krellvax were apex predators, standing nearly 3 meters tall on their hind legs, covered in obsidian black fur that seemed to absorb light itself. Their eyes glowed amber in the darkness, and their claws could shred duralloy plating. The xenobiologists back on Earth had classified them as extremely hostile, and approach with maximum caution. Arya had stumbled into their den while fleeing a rockslide. She'd expected to die. Instead, she'd found Vorin the pack's alpha standing over a whimpering cub no larger than a terrier. The cub was wounded, a gash across its flank oozing black blood. The pack circled anxiously, but none approached. Vorin's mate lay dead nearby, victim to the same rockslide that had nearly claimed Arya. In that moment, Arya had done something that defied every survival instinct. She'd knelt down and opened her emergency medical kit. Vorin had growled, a sound that vibrated through the cave walls and made Arya's bones ache. But she hadn't run. She'd met those amber eyes and slowly, carefully began treating the cub's wound. Her hands had trembled. She was human, after all, not stupid, but they hadn't stopped. The pack could have torn her apart. Vorin could have ended her with a single swipe. Instead, they'd watched as she cleaned, sutured, and bandaged the small creature with the same care she'd give any child. That had been 20 days ago. Now, Arya sat in the den that had become her unlikely sanctuary, surrounded by creatures that could kill her without effort, but chose instead to tolerate her presence. She'd learned to read their body language, to understand the subtle differences in their growls and chirps. She'd learned that Vorin led not through brutality, but through protection, that the pack functioned as a family unit that would die for each other. She'd also learned that Krellvax cubs had nightmares. The cub she'd saved, she'd named him Spark, for the way his eyes flashed when he was curious had grown stronger. His wound had healed cleanly, and he'd begun to follow Arya everywhere, much to Vorin's initial disapproval. But tonight, as the storm outside reached a crescendo that made the cave walls tremble, Spark whimpered in his sleep. The sound was pitiful, a high-pitched keen that spoke of primal fear. The other cubs stirred restlessly. One of the adults growled low, disturbed by the disruption. Vorin himself lifted his massive head, amber eyes finding Arya across the den. She'd been studying the broken communicator from her survival kit, hoping futilely for a signal. But that sound, that universal sound of a child in distress, cut through everything else. Arya set down the useless tech and moved slowly toward Spark. The pack watched her, tense. She'd earned some trust, but instincts died hard. She settled beside the cub, careful not to startle him awake. His small body twitched, claws flexing, that whimper building into what would soon become a full cry. Without thinking, Arya began to hum. It was an old melody, something her grandmother had sung when Arya herself had nightmares as a child. She didn't remember the words anymore, but the tune remained gentle, rhythmic. An ancient human lullaby that had soothed countless frightened children across millennia. Spark's whimpering quieted. His breathing began to slow, matching the cadence of her humming. Arya kept going, one hand hovering near the cub but not quite touching, letting her presence and voice do the work. She didn't notice the pack growing still. Didn't realize that the other cubs had stopped fidgeting, that the adults' growls had faded to silence. She was focused entirely on Spark, on the way his small body gradually relaxed, tension bleeding away note by note. When she finally glanced up, she found every pair of amber eyes fixed on her. Vorin had moved closer, his massive form radiating something that wasn't quite threat but wasn't entirely ease either. He studied her with an intelligence that made Arya acutely aware that this was no simple beast. The Krellvax were sentient in ways humanity was only beginning to understand. She kept humming, softer now, letting the melody wind down naturally. Spark sighed, an almost human sound, and curled tighter, falling into what looked like peaceful sleep. Around the den, the other cubs had settled. One by one, the adults lowered their heads. The pack was resting, truly resting, for the first time since the storm had begun. Vorin rumbled, a deep sound that Arya had learned meant contemplation rather than aggression. He moved until he was directly in front of her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his fur. His breath washed over her face sharp with the scent of raw meat and something wild she couldn't name. Then, slowly, he lowered his head and rested it near his paws, never breaking eye contact with her. It was permission, acceptance, perhaps even gratitude. Arya felt tears prick her eyes, exhaustion, relief, the sheer impossibility of her situation finally breaking through. She was a human woman living with apex predators who should have killed her. She was surviving on an alien world with no hope of rescue, at least not soon. She should have been terrified. Instead, surrounded by the quiet breathing of the pack, with Spark warm against her side, she felt something unexpected. Peace. She began humming again, a different tune this time, something she'd heard in a spaceport bar. A song about wanderers finding home in unexpected places. The pack settled deeper into rest. Even Voron's eyes began to droop, though she suspected he'd wake at the slightest threat. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside the den, a human's voice wove through the darkness, turning fear into comfort, proving that some things transcended species and worlds. Some things, like the need to protect the young and the power of a simple lullaby, were universal. When the rescue team finally found her 40 days later, they discovered Arya asleep against Voron's side, surrounded by a pack of apex predators who had, against all logic, adopted her as one of their own.